Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. So this is to sever off 3 additional lots per se, correct? Which brings the total to 16 lots, if I'm looking at this correctly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have to apologize in that regard. If I could refer you to page 18 of your package. The application is in fact for 3 lots, 3 residential lots on the subject lands. The proposed subdivision that you'd see on page 19, as a staff, we requested the applicant to provide us with something for context of what future development of that area could look like. It is a significant chunk of suburban residential designation, and we felt that it would be in the best interest to acknowledge and find a concept that would facilitate future development while still allowing these 3 severances. You'd note that the Street C on that plan does align well with Tyson's Way. Those are the types of things we're looking for just to ensure that we're not sterilizing any land or creating complications for future development. But at this state, it is just for the 3 lots that are shown on page 18.
Okay, if I could, Mr. Chair?
Certainly.
And thank you for that, for looking into it as a whole rather than piece puzzle. That's perfect. So we're going to add 3 more driveways onto King Street, and we're good with that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have not received any feedback or comments at this time from our development engineering group. They look at the sight lines and the appropriate location of those driveways. Their feedback is obviously how we would appropriately locate any driveways. And if there was any major concerns, those would be brought forward at the recommendation stage.
Okay, thank you.
Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ryan. On page 16, where you show the official plan, the section in yellow of the lands that we're looking at, does that reflect what I see drawn out on page 19 with the full subdivision? Does that use up all of that, what would be recognised as suburban residential land?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, it's an approximation, but yeah, that would be approximately the depth to which they could develop for the urban residential designation purposes. Mr. Van Porten's available, and he could probably speak to that further as to the rationale for that concept, but that's, again, kind of just what we were looking for from them.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question of our planner? Seeing none, I'll ask the applicant or an agent of the applicant to come forward and present. When you arrive at the podium, state your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rob Van Porten, J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. As was described by the planner, the proposal is to rezone 3 lots and create 3 lots on King Street, which is part of the Cherry Produce Limited. They have a large farm and produce shipping business on the property. The 3 lots will be in compliance with the proposed zoning of suburban residential and meet the minimum requirements of that bylaw. We have applied for the severance to create the 3 lots, which will be heard subsequent to the decision on the rezoning. As was pointed out by the planner, the county did ask us to do a what-if concept, which we provided to the county and is part of your package and certainly identifies a larger development. However, you will note that this pretty well will eliminate the business, so it certainly is not the immediate intent or even the medium intent to create this subdivision, but I think in proper planning context, we were required to provide this to the county to prove to county officials and yourselves that the development does work and that the 3 proposed lots will fit into this overall development. Mr. Chair, I can respond to questions.
Thank you. Any member of the committee with a question of our applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open this portion to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on this application? I'll ask, please come forward, sir, ma'am, and state your name and address. Yes? Yep. When you arrive, state your name and address for our clerk and make your presentation.
Jennifer Ryerson Jones. I live at 23 King Street South in Oakland. My main concern is this going to go the way of Paris and Waterford, and the stress on the water that is available and the traffic on that road that's already rather horrendous. And we're starting with 3 building lots, but I understand there's more in the future to be coming. So are we looking at another Tyson's Way subdivision? And again, the same concerns, water, tax hikes, everything else. That's also a bus route, and it's very poorly policed traffic-wise. So with increased people, and whether they work in the area or not, it's like New 24 through there, the speed. So we're adding more people to that. And that's basically my main 3 concerns is stress on the water that's available and taxes and the more traffic on that route. That's it. I don't have a problem with the
Well,
initial 3, but
thank you for your presentation, and your questions will be duly noted by our planning staff. Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one else, I'll close this portion and turn it back to committee. How do you wish to deal with this application? Member Pierce?
Move to receive?
Move to receive. Seeking a seconder, seconded by Member Howes. Any further questions or comments from committee? Seeing none, I'll call the vote to receive. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. This application, as you well know, will come forward at a future time for either approval or to be turned down. Thank you. Moving on to B, application ZBA 36-19-AW. Applicant is Robin Reinhardt, and we're changing planners, and Amanda is coming forward to present. Welcome, Amanda. This is her first time to present an application at public. She just joined our staff in September. Welcome. Proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Just make sure I have this. Through the chair, the zoning bylaw amendment for 42 Brant Mill Road seeks to remove site-specific provision on lands to undergo a subsequent severance application and merger. This presentation is to be received for information purposes only. The subject lands are located south of the Oakland and Brant Mills Road intersection and are located on the east side of Brant Mills Road. The subject lands are currently occupied by a single detached dwelling, detached garage, and workshop. The subject lands have frontage of approximately 134 meters, an average depth of 288 meters, and a total area of approximately 3.86 hectares. Within the County of Brant official plan, the subject lands have been designated as agriculture. The official plan does contemplate for severances within the agriculture designation under specific scenarios, such as a surplus dwelling with the retained lands to be merged with an abutting parcel. The subject lands have been zoned as agricultural with site-specific provision A-13. This provision permits a service shop on the subject lands. The applicants are proposing to sever a parcel with an area of approximately 0.76 hectares, which will include the existing house, garage, and shop. The retained lands are to be merged with the parcel to the south, municipally known as 22 Brant Mill Road. The total merged parcel will have an area of approximately 31.1 hectares. The rezoning application is needed for the retained lands to remove the site-specific provision. This will prevent the merged lands from having the ability to build a shop through the site-specific provision of A13. No new residential building lots will be created. The house and associated structures are to be severed, with the retained lands being merged to the parcel immediately to the south. The severance application is permitted by the official plan as minimal agricultural lands are being removed. The severed lands are minimal, and the proposed lot lines follow the natural lines of the property. In regards to next steps, staff will be preparing a staff recommendation report. review of internal and external comments received through circulation. Should the rezoning be approved at a future date, a subsequent severance application will be undertaken by the applicant. This application will have its own circulation and commenting period. I am happy to answer any questions the committee should have.
Thank you. Any member of the committee with a question of our planner? Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Amanda, welcome.
Thank you.
Just a technical question, and it's probably a simple one. On page 41, it appears that it's the bigger part of that parcel that is being severed, whereas in the body of the report it talks about the smaller part being severed. It's a technicality. One bit gets severed from another, but it is the small part that is being severed from the larger part, not the larger part being severed from the smaller part.
Through the chair, the applicant actually changed the labels on there, so it is the smaller part that is going to be severed, and the larger part is what we have been referring to as the retained, and the larger part is what's going to be merged.
So page 41 is incorrect.
Pardon me?
Page 41 is an incorrect statement.
The labels are wrong on there, yes.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Coleman?
Does the minimum distance apply in this one for nutrient management?
Through the chair, the MDS would apply, but I don't believe it's a issue in this circumstance. They are meeting the MDS.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I want to know.
Any other member of committee with a question of Amanda? Seeing no one, I'll ask the applicant or the agent of the applicant to come forward and present if he so desires. Please state your name and address when you arrive at the podium.
My name's Maria Kinkle, here from 39 Colborne Street, North Simcoe, Ontario. I work with MHN Lawyers. So essentially, the purpose of the application is just to regularize the lot lands according to the actual use. So a good portion of these lands are actually used by the abutting farmer, and we're regularizing the lot lines to actually coordinate that so that who owns it is actually the one using it. That's essentially the gist of this application.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant's agent? Seeing no one, thank you very much. I'll open this portion of the application to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll close the public portion and turn it back to committee. Member LaFerriere. Seeking a second, or seconded by Member House. Any member of committee with a question or comment on this application? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded by LaFerriere and House. We'll call the vote. All those in favor to receive? Opposed? Carried. This application will go forward at a future date for either approval or rejection. Thank you. Moving on to the next application, which is ZBA 37-19-AW, and our planner Amanda will present. Proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Zoning bylaw amendment for 3 West Harris Road seeks to reduce the MDS requirement from 514 meters to 248 meters. This presentation is to be received for information purposes only. The subject lands are located on the east side of Brant School Road and West Harris Road intersection. The subject lands are currently occupied by a single detached dwelling. They have a frontage of 132 meters, a maximum depth of 189 meters, and an area of approximately 1.64 hectares. The subject lands are designated as rural residential and natural heritage. A portion of the subject lands are within the woodlot overlay of the official plan. The subject lands are split zone rural residential and natural heritage, with abutting lands to the north and east zoned as agriculture. Staff note, a portion of the lands are within the GRCA regulation area. Any building would require a permit from the GRCA. The applicant is seeking to create 2 additional residential lots. The existing house would be on Lot A. Lot B and Lot C are the proposed lots. Each lot meets the zoning development regulations for lots zoned as rural residential. To create these lots, the applicant is seeking to amend section 4.24A of the zoning bylaw to allow for reduced minimum distance separation guidelines due to the proximity of two barns. The applicant has submitted planning justification, archaeological assessment, environmental impact study, and MDS calculations. The provincial policy speaks to protecting agricultural lands. The provincial policy statement also requires new lots to comply with the minimum distance separation formula. The growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe allows for the creation of new residential lots, but they are generally to be directed towards settlement areas or in rural areas with appropriate designations. The official plan does allow for the creation of new lots on lands designated as rural residential, however, they are to be of logical development. Per section 3.73A VII, each proposed lot shall have provided a comprehensive drainage and lot grading plan demonstrating no adverse impacts on surrounding properties and satisfactory outlet for stormwater. Staff note this plan was not provided, but it may be provided during the severance application. The County of Brant official plan requires new development on lands designated as rural residential to meet the minimum distance separation formula. Within the County of Brant zoning bylaw 61-16, the applicant seeks to amend section 4.24A, which speaks to MDS. This policy does not allow for the development of new structures or buildings if they do not comply with the MDS guidelines. Oops. Where's the rest of my... The subject lands are outlined on red on this figure. The county has received direction from the ministry that the MDS calculation A is to be used when calculating from an agricultural designation to an agricultural designation. MDS calculation type B is to be used when calculating from an agricultural designation to any other designation. Based on this, a type B calculation is to be used, which is the solid lines on this figure. As a result, the yellow MDS calculation requires a setback of 514 meters, and the purple calculation requires a setback of 477 meters. The applicant is proposing a setback of 248. Staff note MDS guideline number 43 allows for MDS requirements to be varied. In regards to next steps, staff will be preparing a staff recommendation report, review of internal external comments received through circulation. Should the rezoning be approved at a future date, subsequent severance applications will be undertaken by the applicant. These applications will have their own circulation and commenting period. I am happy to answer any questions the committee should have. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Amanda. I'm learning as I go along about MDS, so I'm a little confused. Could you go back to the drawing you just had, the minimum distance separate?
Yeah.
So in the package we have a letter from somebody living at number 9 West Harris Road, which I think is actually within that dotted yellow line. So just to help me, how was that ever accepted as a place to build if the MDS rules were in place? Maybe the MDS rules weren't in place at the time, but I need a bit of education.
Yeah. Through the chair, so actually 9 West Harris was, based on the information I had available, was created through a severance application in 2003. They used the type A calculation because that's what the county was using at that time. So the MDS states that a type A calculation is to be used from agricultural to settlement area, or sorry, type B is to be used for agricultural to settlement areas. The county did not view the rural residential designation as part of the settlement area, so we used the type B, which I said in my presentation was like agricultural to agricultural. So in 2003, when that application went forward for a severance, they used the type A because we did not believe it was part of the settlement area.
It would still appear to be within that yellow dotted circle. So I'm just trying to understand why that happened, because it may have some relevance to the support to the application that's with us today.
Yeah. Through the chair, I'm not 100% sure how that law was created. Based on the information that I had, it went under a severance application in 2003, and the type A would have applied, but I can look into that further and speak to that in my recommendation report.
Thank you. May I ask a second question? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, through Amanda. On page 58, there's a 3 or 4 page submission, and it said, "We are the neighbours." Do the neighbours, do we know which neighbours they are that are writing this submission, that are making the challenge?
We do, sorry, I don't have page 58 in my package, but I do know who made the submission, and I believe the neighbors are here for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. May I just take one last thought? Just a question about a word that's used on, I think it's page 109 of this report. The word is stuffing. I think it's the folks at number 9 West Harris Road are concerned about stuffing 2 new lots into this area. Would they, maybe I shall ask them the question directly, but would one lot be not stuffing? Sorry.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing no one, I'll open this up to the applicant or agent of the applicant to make a presentation. Please come forward, state your name and address, and then present.
Yeah, it's just in PowerPoint, so just the arrows.
I'll get it up for you, Howard.
Oh, it's in the same, it's in there.
Oh, it's already in.
Yeah, it's already in there.
All right, never mind. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The name's Howard Snodgrass, Snodgrass Consulting. The address is on file. Here tonight because the subject property is located as shown on the overhead, and some of this is a little bit of a repetition to what Amanda went through, but I think in due course we'll come up with it. Subject lands are zoned rural residential. It's not agriculture, they already are zoned rural residential. So we're seeking relief from one of the sub-provisions of the bylaw to address MDS. The existing separation distance is approximately 250 meters. This is a slide showing the rough areas of a number of the lots in the area, and this is the largest of all the rural residential zone properties, except one to the south, which is 1 hectare, but I'll come back to it a little later. This slide shows the separation distances required by 2 farm operations, both of which are presently dormant. This is a handbook that is used for calculating MDS. And if you look to the bottom of the screen, the MDS formula calculates a flexible mechanism where it takes into consideration the type of livestock, nutrient units or manure, the degree of expansion proposed, the type of manure disposal system, and the form of development. And that usually gets into what is called factor A or factor E. These are the guidelines. And guideline 12 allows exemptions under the MDS formula. And I would ask you to take a little look at the blue at the bottom, and it says if there's 4 or more residences that are closer than what you're seeking, then the MDS doesn't apply. Dealing with the 1 livestock barn to the east of the subject lands, if you look at the dimensions, there's at least 4 residences that are closer. Hence, it's my submission that that MDS separation doesn't apply. There's 1 additional horse barn that was also examined. This is subsequent to the submission of my material, but again, it's a horse barn that is to the southwest of the property, and again, there's 4 residences, so it doesn't apply. At the, you can see the subject lands here, and there's reference to some livestock on a property towards the northeast of the subject lands. And in all honesty, there's a few chickens that are kept here, in a garden shed. Again, the Foodland Guide, or the implementation manual provides exemption. It's a animal use. It doesn't even qualify as a farm. So it brings us back to the one MDS formula that we need to have regard to. And these are the buildings at the end of West Harris Road, and there's 2 existing residences that are located far closer than my client's lands, and it's our submission that those 2 residences exist and already control the livestock future on the property. The one that's kind of in the middle of the screen, I apologize, I don't have my pointer with me, but as was asked at the first part of the presentation, how was this created? Well, long and short, MDS formula has gone like this over the years. My first dealings with an MDS 40 or MDS formula was back in the late 70s. And it was amazing what you could do. If you did one calculation, come up with this distance requirement. If you did a smaller one and then an expansion, you'd do this much compared to the original. It was all over the map. So with the changes that have been made to the MDS formula over the years, it does not surprise me whatsoever that this law was created in '03. Because, as indicated, the way MDS has gone over the years, it has expanded sometimes and has contracted at other times. So what we have to deal with today is what's here. Now, these are my reasons for requesting the variance. As indicated already, the lands are zoned rural residential. We meet all of the development standards. We meet 40-meter minimum, 0.4 hectare minimum. Second reason, there's 2 residences that are closer, already constrain that farm operation. Third reason, there's a significant amount of bushland between the proposed lots and the nearby farm operation. It creates an excellent buffer. Number 4, recent inspection shows that the farm appears to have been inoperative or inactive for many years. And number 5, if we'd made this application roughly a year and change ago, it would have been a Factor A. Factor B wouldn't have been considered. There's been a reinterpretation of the way we use MDS formula, and that's why we're now here with Factor B or Factor E, whichever category you want to use. So for those reasons, I respectfully submit there is rationale to vary the MDS formula. Now, other work that has been done, there's been an EIS study done for the 2 lots. And this is an extract out of the report, and it shows the 2 residence locations are well outside of the area of concern with the GRCA. And in that report, the area that's highlighted in blue, we're obviously of the opinion that it complies with the applicable planning documents. The report was very exhaustive in its study, and it found that no or globally or provincially significant plant species would be impacted. There was no long-term impacts identified either. In the initial input that I sent in with the application, the GRCA indicated it didn't see any major concerns. Now, this was done before the EIS study was done. And earlier this week, we just got a letter from the GRCA saying no objections. So I can now confirm that the GRCA has no objections. The separation distance between the closest proposed residence and the other nearby residence is just about 100 feet. In my submission, there's a significant separation distance between that existing residence and the proposed closest residence that would be constructed here. And if you take note of the rows, this is an evergreen replantation. It's long and short, where the existing residence is showing. When you drive by, the trees are much higher cut because of the dieback that has occurred. My client's property, the limbs are a little lower and haven't been manicured as much as the neighbor's has. So I'm indicating here that the bush that exists forms a reasonable separation distance. Now, earlier I indicated that there's one or more large properties in the area. This is a property to the south. My client's residence is right at the north part of the screen, the upper portion. The key that I'm just drawing out here is the neighbor's property, which is 1 hectare in size, really only has a fraction of that that's outside the hazard or the heritage zone. So I'm indicating that even though the acreage may be large with some of the neighboring properties, they're constrained by the natural heritage designation or zone that's there. That's the extent of the presentation at this point. Please answer any questions the committee may have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of our applicant? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Snodgrass. You mentioned that earlier this week you received no objections from the GRCA,
Yes, I did.
and the environmental impact study has been completed. Has the county forester looked at the trees on this property? And because if this was to happen, it's obvious that there's a lot of trees that would have to be cut.
I respectfully disagree. There's room for a footprint for a house and a tile bed. The rest of the trees could be maintained. The key is with reforestation plots, they don't last forever. They generally die off. You can visualize one place on Highway 24 north of Highway 53 on your way from the intersection up to Paris. Used to have a big stand of evergreens. They've all died and they're gone. And that happens even in the south end of Paris here. We had a major reforestation area up on Rest Acres Road. It's now part of a subdivision because the trees die. So my submission is we're not affecting part of the natural deciduous forest along the embankments. We're dealing only with the reforested portion, which is already suffering dieback.
So
So with that in mind, I guess what I'm saying is I would really question if the county forester is going to offer any negative comments.
do you know how old the plantation is?
It's probably 40 to 50 years old, based
Thank
on
you.
my experience.
Any other member of committee with a question of our applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Going to open this portion of the application to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Please come forward. State your name and address, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. My name is Blanca Medina de Boqui. My address is 9 West Harris Road. I'm the neighbor of this property. I just want to let the committee know how I came to Brantford. I came from Burlington, and we were very happy to have found our property. Our property is 6.3 acres, and we love it. It's a forestry. If you go there, it seems that you are in a cottage. It's beautiful. We've been maintaining the trees all this time. When we bought the property, the previous owners told us that they applied to build another house, but their application was rejected because of MDS. We were aware that the neighbor, which is the property that wants to develop, won't be able to develop. And that is why we bought our property. When we arrived to our property, we were aware that forest was not being taken care of. We called the county, we called the forestry. They sent people to our property to evaluate the forest, and they told us that we can start cutting down trees, but little by little, because it will affect the whole ecosystem there. They didn't allow us to cut a lot of trees. Then nowadays, our property is starting to look good, but we're respecting nature, because that is why we bought that property, because of the look. This street that you're seeing is a very quiet street, a very small street. It's maybe 500 meters. There are only, right now, 4 houses. The one right now is kind of not altering because it's on the corner. Really, there's only 3 houses. Ours, the neighbor across the street, and the farmers. By allowing you to build 2 additional houses, you're increasing house density in that area 50%. And that goes against to what I saw Brant County developmental plans, where you said you want to develop, but you want to control where the development goes. And you will take in account the residents around the development, that they fit within the nature and the size of the lots. In this case, those houses will not fit with the nature of the lots in the area. It will become very residential. And that is why we moved to Brant County, because we didn't want to be in a residential zone. For us, one of the main concerns is the water table. By cutting all the trees, which is, we're talking about 2.3 acres of trees that will be cut. We've been having problems with water storage. We have to call trucks of water, depending on the year, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, from August to December. Then the water table goes really low. If you increase 2 more housing, depends on the size of the houses, then that will affect us directly. And according to the county information that I read, your plan is to develop houses where they do not affect the existing properties. And in this case, it will affect our property directly. The other issue that we saw is that we have a lot of wild turkeys, we have deers there, we have a lot of squirrels, we even have owls, sorry, English is not my first language, there. And we have a beautiful, on the properties, all looked at the creek. And on the Fairchild Creek, we have a lot of trilliums flowers in the spring. And we were told by the people from the Ministry of Forestry that we have to really take care of that and all the trees that we have back there. And well, mainly that's our main concern. If this developed from a beautiful street that was a country living style of housing there, will become really residential, and it will really affect the environment. It will have impact on the environment, it will have impact on the water table, and it will have increase in 50% the density of the houses in that small street. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one else, I'll close this portion and turn it back to committee. How does committee wish to deal with the application? Member Howes, moving to receive,
Yeah, move to receive as information.
seconded by Member Pierce. Any further questions or comments of our planner? Seeing none, I'll call the vote to receive. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. As you understand, this application will come forward with a recommendation at a future date. Thank you very much. That concludes the portion of public hearings to just receive information. We'll move on to public hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. And our planner, Ryan Cummings, is back in the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject lands are located on the northeast corner of Middleport Road and Hager Street, north.
First of all, I should introduce it. It's application ZBA 24-19-RC. And now you can proceed, Ryan. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Subject lands are located on the northeast corner of Middleport Road and Hager Street, north of Highway 54 in the former township of Onondaga. The subject lands have a frontage of approximately 793 meters on Middleport Road and an area of approximately 17.9 hectares or 44.3 acres. The primary uses in the immediate area are agricultural to the north, east, and west, and residential uses to the south. The subject lands are designated agriculture in the official plan. The applicant is proposing to amend the current zoning on the subject lands from agricultural A to agricultural employment special exception AE to allow for a contractor's yard as a permitted use. As of November 27th, the applicant has formally withdrawn the request to rezone these lands to agricultural employment. The applicant has indicated that they have found a location for lease to house their business and that the business will be moved out of 4 Middleport Road by January 1st, 2020. Through review of the latest submitted as constructed survey, it has become apparent that the building has been constructed to a deficient street setback of 15 meters. This setback is inconsistent with the building permit that was originally issued for a 20-meter street setback. Staff notes that during the zoning review process for the original building permit, a street setback of 20 meters was permitted in error. Section 6.2 of the zoning bylaw requires a minimum street setback of 25 meters for all buildings not classified as a dwelling within the agricultural A zone. The applicant will be speaking to the committee tonight to outline the status of the request, which also includes a formal withdrawal of the request for the AE zoning. Staff is prepared with a list of several options for how the committee may wish to deal with the application at this time, once we have heard from the applicant. This concludes my remarks for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Any member of the committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or agent of the applicant here would like to speak to this application? Please come forward to the podium, state your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Rob Van Port and J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. As pointed out by the planner, the original application was to rezone a small portion of the property from agricultural to agricultural employment to allow for the continuation of a heating and mechanical business which was established in the newly constructed building on the lot. After hearing concerns from the general public, members of council, and county staff, we withdrew the application to rezone the parcel, and as pointed out by the planner, the proponent has secured an alternate site for his business, which ironically is the one that he was originally in before he moved, and he is committed to moving the business prior to January 1st. This would allow a continuation of the business, his clients, and obviously his employees. And the applicant is also fully aware of the use requirements of the agricultural zone, and obviously he must convert this building to comply with the agricultural zoning use category. As pointed out by the planner, during the review of the application, we received a survey of the property, a portion of it is shown on the overhead. And it indicated that the corner of the building is in fact 15 meters from the front property line, whereas the accepted setback requirement is 20 meters as indicated by the planner. This survey is included in your package, I think on page 181, but it is in the overhead, or enlargement is in the overhead. During the construction of the building, no stakes, I understand, no stakes, property stakes were found on the property. The closest one would have been in the middle of the driveway located along the south boundary of the property in the middle of the neighbor's driveway. When we did this, or when John Muir did the survey, he also found a number of encroachments of neighboring uses, sheds, driveways. I think in one case even a satellite dish that are encroaching onto our client's property. But anyways, the stake that was to be located in the middle, or should be located in the middle of the driveway of the neighbor's property, was not there. And when the survey was done, the surveyor obviously had to reestablish the stake. The survey was done after the construction of the building. In respect to location of the building relative to the front property line, it must be pointed out that the property in this location is extremely deep. There's absolutely no reason why it could not have been established at the required building line. And the only reason I can come up with that it's in its current location is because of the lack of the ability of the contractor to establish where the front property line is. And I believe he probably measured from the edge of road. And ironically, a corner of the building is in fact 20 point something from the edge of the road. And this is why I came to that conclusion that, again, I believe he took the measurement from the wrong location. And again, pointing out that there was absolutely no reason why the building could not have been moved back to comply with the bylaw if, in fact, the front property line could have been established. As I mentioned, the building is now constructed 15 meters from the property line as established by the survey, which is 50 feet from the front lot line. Opposite to the front of the building is farmland contained within Six Nation Reserve number 40. And the location of the building would not appear to be impact the surrounding uses. You know, it also must be pointed out that the client actually owns all the properties from Middleport all the way to the north to, I believe, it's the rail line. So he is the sole occupant of land on the east side, and on the west side it's farmland within the Indian Reserve number 40. In respect to the side yard of the building, the agricultural zone requires the building to be set back 15 meters, and the survey will indicate that the building is in fact 19.3 if I recall. Thank you, Ryan. So the building is not is totally in compliant with the side yard requirements of the agricultural zone. I am therefore of the opinion that front yard setback is minor in the context of surrounding uses and maintains a considerable setback on the portion of Middleport Road, which is only occupied, in fact, by the applicant, as he is the sole owner and farms the property from the hamlet of Middleport northward. Mr. Chair, as I indicated, we've withdrew the application for the rezoning. The client is prepared and is preparing to move his business elsewhere off of the property. And I am confident that neighbors and the county staff will ensure that the use continues, or use is in compliance with the agricultural category. Mr. Chair, I can respond to questions.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you. I may call you back, Mr. Van Porten.
Absolutely.
Any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Please come forward, state your name and address, make your presentation.
Good evening. My name is Byron Souls. I live at 12 Hager Street in Middleport, Ontario. I just have a few questions for the chair and the council. I have reason to believe that there is a bathroom that is in this building along with a septic tank, and I'm just wondering why this hasn't been addressed. I understand that just from what this gentleman just talked about here, that they had a hard time finding the property lines. Well, they found the side property line fine. I don't understand why they had a hard time finding the front of the property line. So that was one of my concerns too as well. And furthermore, I'm wondering if there was mistakes made building this garage or business or whatever it is, if the actual residency has problems too as well. Now, the actual Middleport Village was never notified, and I never received anything, that this home was to be built on the property. And along with that, I never seen one of them MDS things. I don't know too much about it, but I never seen that on the property. Any kind of environmental assessment. He has cattle on the property too as well. One of them covered barns went up, and I don't know how many cattle he has. I don't know if any of that was looked at. The people of Middleport are asking some questions, and I was just wondering if Mr. Chair or the council could answer those for me.
Thank you. The applicant would like to come back and attempt to address some of those questions. Question number one is concerning a washroom in the building. Question number two is the property lines. Why were you able to determine the east boundary without a problem but not the front boundary? And does MDS apply in this situation? Mr. Van Porten, if you'd like to attempt to answer those questions, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. In respect to washrooms, I'm not aware of anything that would preclude a washroom being built in an accessory building. Certainly, there is a septic system that was installed. It was designed by our firm, and that's really the only activity that we had with this property before the rezoning, but certainly I'm not aware of anything that would preclude a washroom being built in an accessory building. The second question is in respect to lot lines. The front lot line is usually determined by the stake along the road. I'm to understand from the surveyor that the stake was not there, and therefore I can only surmise that that resulted in a miscalculation of the location of the front lot line by the original contractor. I must also point out that during the building process, I would assume that the county inspector would also be in constantly on the site to determine not only building activities but the location of the building, because I believe that is probably one of the first inspections that have to be done. Sorry, I can't remember the third.
MDS.
Oh, MDS. Sorry, I apologize. Yes, it's correct. There is cattle on site. But if this building received a building permit for the purpose of a farm storage building, and MDS therefore would not apply because it is on the same property as the cattle. And I guess the fourth point is notification. I'm not aware of anything unless there is a planning decision that has to be made where there is a requirement for notification of the building of a building on neighboring properties.
Thank you. Before I go any further, I've made a mistake by calling Mr. Van Porten back up. I should have entertained anyone else the public would like to speak to this application. I'll ask a second time, is there any other member of the public would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the public would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, before I close this portion, now I'm going to turn it back to the planner, Ryan, who has a couple of comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suppose just as a follow-up to a couple of those questions and points, with respect to the bathroom and the septic system, the building division does have an open order to comply on the property. Our general practice here is to remain status quo until a Planning Act decision has been made for action on those outstanding orders. With a decision on this item either tonight or in near future, our building division will undertake to remedy the concerns, specifically as it relates to removing the use, which we have heard from the applicant will be done by the new year. And then also, I've spoken with Mr. Gravel, the chief building official, and he's confirmed that they will require the septic system design data to verify that it's acceptable under the OBC, and then it will be permitted to remain. And the other question, I suppose, was with respects to notifications for private dwellings. There's no notices required for the construction of a private dwelling. That doesn't require any Planning Act approvals, such as a minor variance or a severance, which is what we were dealing with earlier tonight. And finally, I just echo Mr. Van Porten's comments about the MDS item. The proposal is not to house livestock in this barn or in this implement shed. And so that's not a consideration as it's located on the same property. So with that being said, if I could, in consultation with my managers here, we've kind of come up with a few options here for the committee to consider as to how we'd like to deal with it. So if I may, so the first option would be to...
Should I close this portion before you put that forward, Ryan?
Well, it's just a discussion.
You're just responding.
Sure.
Answers to the public. I'm going to close this portion of the public, and I'm going to revert it back to planning, but before I put it back to the committee for a decision, Ryan is going to give you some options to consider. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. My apologies.
It's my fault.
In consultation with my managers, these are some of the options that we suggest would be appropriate, or how the committee could deal with it. Again, there's a variety of ways to deal with this application tonight. It is noted again that a building permit was issued in error for the street setback at 20 meters. The applicant did not meet that street setback requirement. It is currently built at 15 meters. There needs to be a remedy to that in some way, and these are the options that we've set forward, hopefully to satisfy the committee's preference. So the first would be to defer it to the decision to the Committee of Adjustment. This was suggested by the applicant, and as a staff, we see some advantages to this. The one disadvantage right off the top would that be that the decision would be made by the Committee of Adjustment and not this committee. However, there are some challenges with dealing with site design through a zoning application. The Committee of Adjustment does have the ability to impose conditions as they see fit, as it relates to a minor variance, for example. And in our eyes, there are some advantages to having a minor variance application dealt with by that committee, because we can request, and most likely we will have conditions imposed that would require things like a landscape buffer, a site plan showing those landscape buffers, a development agreement that we would register on the property that would ensure that those landscape buffers were maintained. And we'd also be able to take securities. The applicant would have to lodge securities with us, and we'd hold that money to ensure that the landscaping was installed to our satisfaction. That's one option. Another option would be for this committee to approve a rezoning to acknowledge an existing deficient setback that we've been discussing tonight. We'd implement a site-specific zoning bylaw on this portion of the subject property to acknowledge the deficient setback. We would request a letter of undertaking from the applicant and their lawyer to verify that they will install a landscape buffer adjacent to the residences between the existing building and the adjacent residences. Another option would be to defer the decision to the January 7th PAC meeting. I understand that this has been of particular concern to the neighbors. It would probably be of everybody's preference to have it dealt with tonight. However, it would be noted that the notice that did go out a couple weeks ago did not speak in direct terms to that setback requirement, and there's an option to recirculate, and it would also give me an opportunity to write a new report with some different perspectives. And then finally, the fourth option that we have here is to refuse the rezoning outright, which would require the building to be demolished or modified with that 5-meter reduction to the 20 meters that was permitted in the building permit. So that concludes my comments now. I'm open to any questions.
Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, before I decide on the options up there, can you tell me, has our lot grading technician at the county verified that the final property grading on site meets with the plan from Cahoons?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not at this time. As I had alluded to earlier, the stop work order, or sorry, the building orders have not been acted on at this time. So what the applicant would be required to do in future is to meet the lot grading that was set out in the grading plan that was provided, in order for Andre to close the building file. And so at this time, this is not the same as, say, a site plan control application. This was originally a simple building permit application, and that is something that has to be required for an occupancy permit and such before the building permit file is closed.
But irrespective of how we handle it, that will be dealt with, because there were concerns made by the neighbors. Thank you.
Member Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. So just to confirm, it's just the one corner of the building that's less than the 20 meters, right? It's not the whole front of the building by the way the road goes. It's just the one end of it?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, it is actually deficient on both corners, and I'll just point that out. I know it's difficult to read, but I'll try and relay this through the overhead.
Oh, it's 17.1. I'm sorry. I
So
just
you
saw
have
that.
15 meters is the closest setback. The next closest to the south corner, the southwesterly corner of the building is 17.1 meters, and that has been survey verified, so this is what we were kind of waiting on. And that's, 15 is the minimum at this time.
Thank you. Okay.
Member LaFerriere?
Thank you, Councillor Wheat. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ryan. Can we go back to that options package there? So if number 1 was to happen and it went to the Committee of Adjustment for a minor variance, if they denied it, then what would happen? Would it come back to us, or what would be the process?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the committee's decision would be final in their respect, and then they would have an opportunity to come back to this committee they also would have the opportunity to appeal that decision to the LPAT, being the applicant as well. So there's a couple of options there as well.
Member Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ryan. Ryan, I think I heard you right when you said if we don't go ahead with the rezoning from A to AE, then the minimum setback should actually be 25 metres? Is that what you said?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and it is a little difficult the way that these things played out. And so with the AE zone being put aside, we are acknowledging, I believe this is our direction from my senior managers here, that we will acknowledge the error that was made in the zoning review originally when the building permit was submitted. When our zoning, my colleagues who do the zoning review, acknowledged that 20 meters was made in error. The zoning bylaw as it reads is 25 meters. And so the decision could be written kind of either way, but the requirement in any other scenario for an agricultural building would be 25 meter street setback. We are just going to, we would prefer to honor what was written on the building permit because it's applicable law in our eyes anyways. So, but the 15 meters is what needs to be recognized in either scenario.
Thank you. If I may, a second question. I'm left with a sense of that the applicant has tried to fool us. He applied for something which ultimately he did not follow through on. He said it was going to be an agricultural accessory facility and it turned out to be something else. Now, my concern is that that was a deliberate choice to call it one thing and apply it to something else. And I don't know what the precedent is in this council to deal with that kind of, I would call it trickery. I may be wrong, but that's how it comes across. And I would appreciate to have some sense of what has happened in this case before, or these cases before.
Member Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to staff is why didn't building department catch this error at the start? I might peeve some people off saying that, but I want to know why. They're supposed to measure this stuff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I deferred to my management here to speak on behalf of the department.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe, Councillor Coleman, that the building inspectors would have, they may not have knowledge of exactly where the property line is when they go out to do their inspection. And it might be difficult in the field to determine, if the building permit that they had said it was supposed to be 20 meters, I mean, the one corner was 17, I believe we said, so it's not that far out, so you'd be kind of doing one of these, is it close, is it not close? I think the thing that tipped it off more was the use of the building. That's what really caught everyone's eye initially. And then we found out, as the planner indicated, that just recently we actually received the survey, so we actually got confirmation of the distances. So it would have been tough to determine that in the field, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I got an answer to my question. In a sense, and it's written in the report, this is an illegal use of this building, and it's a deliberately illegal use. It's not an accidental misuse. It's a deliberate misuse, or it appears to be a deliberate misuse. And I'm interested to know what we have done, what's the precedent we have in the council for dealing with this kind of situation.
I don't have, if you're looking to me, I do not have an answer. I do not have an answer for that, but I think my opinion is it's inappropriate to accuse someone of doing something deliberate.
Well, I'm just asking, if I may, if we believe that it is an accidental misuse, and I honestly don't believe that, but if it is, I can understand the courses of action that are being put there. But do we want to set an example of how apparently accidental misuses can be tolerated? I think we're setting ourselves up for a run of problems that will be of the same kind.
At some point in time, I'm going to turn this to committee to make a decision on one of those four options, so you can keep your opinion to yourself to that point, sir. Anyone else with a question or a comment? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I can recall at least one situation where a building was built not quite where it was supposed to have been built in our county, and we had to do a correction. There was another application that had to come forward to recognize what was actually built. And I'm not going to name the company, but we have run into this thing before. Staff, no.
Is that your comment, Member Gatward?
Yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you. Anyone else with a question or a comment? Seeing none, I'm going to turn this back to committee and ask someone to make a motion to promote one of those four options, and I hope you have a seconder, and then we can discuss that option. Member Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I'm the only one around this horseshoe that's a little confused with this whole thing, so I think it may be pertinent that we do allow a little bit more time and defer this to, so I'm choosing option 3. to defer it to the January 7th pack so we can get a little bit more information and staff has a little bit more time to undertake a report as to what is there. Looking for a seconder.
Do we have a seconder for that? Member McAlpine seconds. Further discussion to option 3, which has been moved by Member Pearson, seconded by Member McAlpine. Member Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do believe that that gives the public the opportunity to comment on what the final look will be if we incorporate some of the things that are in number 1, like the buffering and the landscaping, because some of that is in the zoning bylaw anyway. And it also gives the public the opportunity, if they wish, to comment on the overall end product or end decision, if you want to say. That's what we did with the other one. And generally the public nobody came forward because they were pleased with what was how it was handled. That's all I have.
Anyone else with a comment? Member Chambers?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, a question to the planner with regard to the difference between staff would be able to request conditions if it went the Committee of Adjustment route, and the second one that we would request a letter of undertaking. What's the difference in how it will play out?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
In other words, if I can just explain my question, is a request for a letter of undertaking carry as much weight as a condition in the minor variance?
No. That would be the short answer, Mr. Chair. No. The letter of undertaking would require the applicant to establish a landscape buffer with planting. It's not registered on title, it doesn't run with the lands, but that's what we're restricted to, or what we have as a tool to use in a zoning, in a rezoning application. The Committee of Adjustment does have the powers to impose conditions as they see appropriate. Those conditions would include things like a development agreement, which is registered on the title of the property and would run with the property in perpetuity until otherwise updated. In that case, it's not dissimilar to what we do with site plan control applications. We have plans that we review and approve, and they are registered on the title of the land, and the applicant owner is not able to deviate from those plans unless there is a revision made and approved. In the instance of a undertaking, it's in today's world, it's not in the future necessarily, for lack of better terms.
Further? Member Chambers?
And a second question through you, Mr. Chairman, to the planner. If we refuse the application outright, that doesn't preclude the applicant from either resubmitting an application for a zoning change or submitting an application to the Committee of Adjustment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I could have clarified number 4. That would be to refuse the request for the rezoning for the street setback as well. That was just another option. Refusing the application as it's written in the agenda would not be of very much use tonight. And so the 4th option should have probably stated to refuse the setback request as it is.
Member Howes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. So in the option number 3, reviewing this again in January, we still have the opportunity at that point to either refuse or approve or have it go to Committee of Adjustment, right? So all those options are still available at that time if we push this to January with more information.
I think the benefit to number 3 would be that I, as a staff member, would be able to write a report speaking to this specific item. It only has come forth since the request to withdraw that application from the applicant. So that would be the benefit of that, of course.
Any other member of the committee with a question? Member Chambers? Bearing in mind, we've got a mover and a seconder for option 3 at the present time.
Specifically with option 3, it says updated notices would also be sent out. If we defer the decision and updated notices are sent out, that implies that we are going to reopen the public meeting for further discussion and input from the public. Is that part and parcel of recommendation number 3?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. We would update the notices and send them out, inviting any members of the public to make submissions as they see fit.
Any further questions, comments? Then I'm going to call the vote. I have a mover and a seconder on option 3. All those in favor of option 3? Got the count? Yeah. Opposed? Got the count? It was approved. Option 3 is approved. This option will go forward to council for final council approval, I believe, 2 weeks from this evening, sir. Moving on to consent items. A, there's a consent item to be approved, and it's A1. Jen, thinking that there may be questions, would you like to join me at the table? Don't be shy. First of all, though, while Jennifer's coming forward, is I need a mover and a seconder.
For the water?
For 9A, moved by Member LaFerriere, and second by Member House. Any questions or comments before I call the vote? And thanks for joining me. Seeing no questions or comments, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And this will go forward to council for final approval. Moving on to consent items to be received. Seeking a mover and a seconder. Moved by Member Pierce, second by Member McAlpine to receive his information. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Moving on to committee reports. Heritage Committee, thanks for your exercise and your little walk.
Thanks for everything.
Sorry, I anticipated.
You know, it's a good report.
I anticipated a barrage of questions. But you got a little exercise here. Heritage Committee report, House Committee wish to deal with it? Moved by Member Coleman, seconded by Member McAlpine. Member Pierce has a question.
I do, Mr. Chair, through you if I could, and
Certainly.
just for my own, in reading this report, I'm trying to understand why one would want to remove a heritage designation. It doesn't really say why. I'm curious as to why.
We'll try and,
What does that gain?
I'll try and add some humor. If I was sitting out there instead of here, I would respond to you. But as the chair, I'm only here to run the meeting. So
Well, thank you for that non-answer, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that.
that's right. Well, I, as chairman, I don't feel I should direct.
Okay, am I able
But if I
to,
was sitting out there, I would certainly comment.
through you to anybody?
Member McAlpine, who is the chair of Heritage, may wish to answer.
I guess the person that's currently purchased the property, okay, feel that it's going to be a burden to them wanting to do any work on the property, even though it isn't actually, but that's their presumption. And I guess there was some issues in the past with the previous owners who wanted to do some work on the property, and they ran into some complications. And I'm under the understanding that they're a family member of the previous owners, but that's the basic background. But our recommendation is, it was kind of a weak process to becoming designated to begin with. So there's some questions of whether it should have been designated to begin with anyway. And so we're recommending if they want to remove the designation, it would be at their cost, so.
Yeah, I saw that in there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that.
I'll respond on the parking lot.
Ooh, in the parking lot, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member Chambers.
Through you, I'm just looking at associated costs. I'm just wondering what that would entail, a circulation of the bylaw, or I'm not sure what the associated costs would be. Would it be onerous or non-onerous, or?
Be notice in the newspaper, just making it public knowledge, so the cost would be minimal.
Okay. And my second question and last question is that it be added to the Heritage Registry. What is the Heritage Registry?
I'm going to refer to the chairman of Heritage Committee.
So the Heritage Registry is basically a list of homes throughout the county, roughly of 100 years old or older, that have a historic nature to them that we appreciate. It's, and we're working on that right now to bring to council in the future to give it a little bit more heft, but not a lot. It's not encumbrance per se, so, yeah. It's
Member
a step
Chambers?
under designation, yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to the recommendation, whichever support, and having been the one that signed the bylaw that designated this in the first place many, many years ago, that was the thrust of what we were trying to do back in the day in Burford Township when we wanted to recognize some of the historically interesting / significant properties in the township. And we had a committee, a heritage committee established, and they recommended a bunch of houses, and we designated them. And probably we designated them by bylaw, and where we should have just had a heritage registry and added them to that. So it was a little bit of good intentions that had unintended consequences, and we're rectifying that consequence now, and I think we should.
Anyone else with a comment or a question? Seeing none, I'll call the vote to receive and refer to the registry. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Moving to staff reports, there are none listed. There are no communications listed. No one mentioned other business when I did the agenda. General Manager's update. Do you have anything you want to update us on, Pam or Rob? Seeing nothing. In camera, there's none listed. Next meeting, it's going to be a little bit of discussion in confrontation with Adam. This is following January 7th, is close on the heels of the offices being closed between Christmas and New Year's, so we would like to move it back to January 14th. Does that mean meet everyone's approval? Member Pierce? Member Howes?
That would make it the second Tuesday of the month.
That's correct.
Would give us a conflict with the library board.
That's the library's problem. We're just worried about this committee.
I see.
Anyone else with a comment? Member Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just a comment, for committees, word here. We also, yesterday in community service, because of the New Year's and all that kind of stuff at Howell, we actually pushed the community service meeting till the 13th, and it'll be prior to the CDC, so the same thoughts are involved with that, just for committee's awareness.
Same type of situation.
Yep.
Well, I'll call the vote. January 14th. All those in favor? Opposed? Next meeting will be January 14th. Right here, 7 p.m. Meeting's adjourned.